We're back today with Steve Durbin, Managing Director of the Information Security Forum, to talk about the role of the end user, the weakest or strongest link in the security chain. One of the threats you point to for 2017 is the relevance of the end user, who can be either the most vulnerable cog or the strongest link in the security chain. You suggest that organizations with security programs based purely on policy, or say endpoint detection software, are still at risk of threats from the inside, whether they come unknowingly. Phishing attacks are rampant, or through malicious intent, for example, a disgruntled employee. You're suggesting a shift away from standard protection technology to policies and procedures for people within the organization to take security very seriously. We forget about security until there's a fire drill, our bonus is taken away, or we're hacked, and then we're really put through the ringer. To what extent, Steve, are data breaches caused by internal factors rather than by external factors?
I think if we look back, Tavia, at most recent breaches, my answer to that would be it's a combination of the two. Certainly there is somebody in the external who has decided that information is of interest and therefore would like to exfiltrate. And then there is probably some form of phishing attack or some form of malware that is put onto a network that can come through an individual within the organization, perhaps not thinking clearly about what they might be doing. We have seen an increase in phishing. There's no question about that. And I think this is why a lot of organizations now are moving towards trying to focus on having their employees stop and think before they click. We've seen again, particularly when we get towards the end of a financial year, of course, the so-called emails that purport to come from the chief financial officer and so on. These are the sorts of things that are relatively common and yet are still relatively effective. Because why is that? It's because we're under pressure. We're constantly working through things. We want to get things done, and we see something, we don't perhaps read it in as much detail as we might, and we just clear it off our desks. That's quite natural. And I think that, cyber criminals in particular are aware of that. They're very aware of the human psychology. So for me, the effective security organization is really made up of employees who are completely engaged around understanding the value that they bring to the enterprise, particularly in a security manner. What I mean by that is employees understanding that they are the strongest link in the security chain. They are the human firewall, if you like. They have the ability to stop things in its tracks. Now, from an organizational standpoint, of course, we need to provide our people with the tools to do that. So it is about helping them to understand the role that they play. It is about breaking down very clearly what they can and cannot do, what they should be able to expect in terms of the way that they manage security across the business. It's about leadership. So it's absolutely no good at all having all of your staff being required, for instance, to password protect their devices if the chief executive doesn't do it. That's what I mean by leadership. So it's about having common and consistent rules that apply right the way across the board. It isn't acceptable for perhaps a CFO to take home spreadsheets if your policy says that you can't, and yet you take disciplinary action for somebody who's a finance assistant who is doing it because they thought that would help to get the job done. And so at the ISF, what we've done when we begin to look at some of the human behavior elements is we've divided insiders, if you like, the human experience into three different blocks. We've pulled out and identified what we call the malicious insider. So this is somebody who is determined to steal information or to release information when they know full well they shouldn't be doing it, and they could be doing it for a variety of reasons, from ideology through to just a disgruntled worker. Then we've looked at the accidental. The accidental is really somebody who is just making a mistake. It's what the name implies, So I get an email that comes in, and I don't really read it properly. I happen to click on it and I open it, and it is a phishing attack. It does contain malware and so on. So again, it's how do you then deal with those kinds of individuals? How do you provide them with the right support, the right training, the right level of awareness on an ongoing basis so that you reduce the amount of accidents? For me, cyber accidents should be viewed in the same way as other accidents in the workplace. It's a health and safety issue. It isn't anything more than that. And then you have the block in the middle. And these are the people who are perhaps aware of processes and procedures that you have, but for whatever reason, often good in their minds, decide to work around it because it will get the job done quicker, faster, better in their estimation. And again, this points to having to provide the right level of awareness and training and so on. But it's about providing these interventions at the point in time when the incident occurs. So it's absolutely no good, 2 weeks after I've clicked on something, coming back to me and telling me I shouldn't have done something. So when we do things like phishing training exercises, for instance, which a lot of organizations will do, it's about providing that instant feedback so that we can learn from it. That's how you begin to move the individual employee to being this strongest link in the chain, the real human firewall, as opposed to really just expecting people to behave in a certain way, because we won't. It's as simple as that.
Sure. How can organizations ensure that they're making their people the strongest line of defense against cyber attack?
I think a lot of it comes down to communication. I think a lot of it comes down to really trying to relate very clearly some of your security posture to the individual. So I've talked a lot about some of the best awareness programs that we've seen from an ISF standpoint, and they all tend to center around the ability of the individual to relate to something outside of the workplace. So I might have a problem, for instance, in not wanting my children to be able to access certain websites on the internet. If you can help me to overcome that problem, I'm much more liable and likely to implement it. And then I'm going to take that learning back into the workplace. I'm probably also going to tell some of my colleagues about it at the water cooler or coffee machine or whatever it might be. And so you're starting at the corporate level anyway to achieve some of your objectives, which is, do we have heightened awareness around some of these things? Are we spreading the word across more generally the enterprise? And those are the sorts of areas that we need to try to focus on, I think, rather than coming at it much more from, this would be good for the business, because people don't really buy that anymore. We really do fall in line with things that work for us as individuals. And so if we can relate to that for me is how we really go about, I think, enacting some pretty significant change in terms of the way that people come to security, because there's something in it for us. It isn't just about complying. And so those are the sorts of things I think that we need to see from an awareness standpoint. And those are the sorts of things that we know are much more effective in the real life situation.
Well, we're now at the point where cybersecurity must be embedded into our enterprise. This has been a great examination of the necessity for ongoing security awareness training and why security has to be a part of corporate culture. Thanks for bringing to light how a trusted insider can be cybersecurity's strongest defense or its weakest link. This podcast concludes the Information Security Forum's Threat Outlook 2017 podcast series, with ISF Managing Director Steve Durbin giving his forecast on the most prevalent threats coming this year. In addition to the role of the end user and insider threat, our Threat Outlook podcasts have covered the Internet of Things, IoT, the growth of cyber crime syndicates, and government and regulation. We heard from Steve Durbin on the risks these threats pose to business, how to manage them, and even leverage them for business value. For more information on global security threats that businesses are facing in 2017 and beyond, please visit the Information Security Forum online at www.isf.org. www.securityforum.org.